Hello, welcome back to Carl Sandburg College. My name is Gene Beetler, and today we're going to talk about lines, fittings, and couplers. And so we got a whole bunch here we can look at. I selected a few to show you what I've got here. Let's take a look at some basic hoses first. This hose is a fabric braided hose, usually typically done on return lines and low pressure fuel and that type stuff. I brought it out just to show you one style of hose. It does not go for high pressure, and it's typically used on a suction line or a fuel delivery. Commonly used a lot in my world is a double braided hose, 2-wire. They're really good for high pressure and still got some flexibility in it. Another type of hose that we use is a single braid hose. This one here had a little trouble. I sawed it in two. It kind of frayed a little bit. You should be able to get a better cut than that, but that's the way I got it. It's made for a more flexible application, a little lower pressure. Since it's a single braid hose, you won't get the strength out of it, but it does give you a little possibility for a more flexible use and a little more when you got vibration. Primarily, I use the double braid hose for most of my applications because I want strength, and usually the vibration is not a concern to me. So that's about on hoses there. On a pneumatic side of things, we use a lot of plastic and fixed line, either copper or steel, aluminum. A lot of different applications are going to require different types of flexible couplings, so we got to utilize what we have to have by the manufacturer's recommendation. So with this type of hose, we're going to probably see a coupler like this. Show you what couplers we have here. This is a push type of a instant lock. You basically push it on and it's locked, and to release it, you press the plastic spring with a plastic tip, and it depresses the spring and it releases it pretty easily. So that's a reusable coupler, and it's quick, low pressure, probably less than a couple hundred pounds, probably about 150 psi is going to be maximum pressure, working pressure for it. Hoses, I think what I said, hoses are measured by working pressure and by burst pressure. And typically burst pressure is about 4 times what working pressure is, so they're going to guarantee us to have the strength to hold up under the load we're going to put on it, because everybody seems to always want to put more pressure on a hose than it's designed for. So there's a little bit of a fail-safe setup in it. But measurements on them are going to be by burst pressure and by working pressure. So that's something to know about. This particular hose says it's abrasion resistant on the covering. I've got some other hose, it's a flame resistant. You know, they all have their limitations, so we got to be careful where we put a hose. That's the second thing that concerns you on the application, is where it's going to be used at. So the type of operation, the pressures on it, the types of fluid, also the conditions around it, how high temperatures surrounding it, whether we're next to an exhaust manifold and things like that. So that's all important to note too when we measure. Going over to fittings and couplers, there's a wide variety. Fittings. We got what's called a 37-degree JIC fitting. This is used commonly on hydraulics. It's a good standby fitting, although today we're going towards more the flat face. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here's a pipe fitting, National Pipe Thread. It utilizes basic taper of threads to fit. Won't go as high a pressure, but still pretty good in a lot of what I call general applications and usage. If you go down to different other types of fixed lines, we can go to a double flare. That particular, we can do a single flare on lighter applications. This double flare you're going to use probably like on a brake line or something where you got extreme conditions. Here's a type of fitting I see on fuel lines. It's got a little seal that goes over it, and you set that down in the bore and you tighten it up. It's a type of compression fitting. It squeezes that rubber just a little bit and expands it just a little bit as it's tightening down. Still low pressure, fuel and delivery, not going to be under extreme conditions like an injector or anything like that. If you're under a real lightweight condition, you can use a barb fitting and a hose clamp. They're still used in some applications. Got another one here. compression fittings I just mentioned earlier. Here's one type. This is just an old brass compression fitting. It works pretty good under not real high pressure, but quick. It's quick to put on, like a copper line. Also, you can use some of them on the plastic lines. They'll use a compression fitting. So that's another type of fitting. Here's one on a rubber hose. It's called a push lock. It's made for low pressure. You just push it on, and then the barbs on it, lock it on, and you have to end up using a knife to cut them off. They're used on lighter weight, like transmission or maybe steering lines where you don't have extreme pressure, but it allows you some flexibility. Another style. Utilize what manufacturer recommends. If you don't know what they need, you ask. Okay. Another fitting is a Boss fitting, Boss O-ring fitting. This will be on like blocks where you've got like a valve block. Typically they use a Boss O-ring. Thread that into it. The O-ring there seals up, tightens up, and it works pretty well for that matter. Like I said, that's some of the types of fittings that have been used for years. Today we're going more to a flat face or a face seal. They're putting an O-ring inside of a bore, a little bit of a indentation there. I'll get it. There we go. All right. Got a little bore for the O-ring to fit into. It mates up against a flat surface inside the fitting. So when you thread it in together, it's got a solid static seal, and it holds up real well under the higher pressure. These typically go to about 5,000 psi without any trouble at all. Where the old JIC fitting here, a 37-degree flare, probably 2,500 would be about maximum you want to run it on. So you don't want to run it as high as pressure. So we're getting some more uses out of that type fitting. So that gives us some fittings that we can work with. So now we've talked about hoses, we've talked about fittings. Now let's talk about couplers. When you got to couple something together and you got to have a quick couple, this is some types of fittings we got. All right. Here's a ball bearing fitting. This in particular one is a John Deere fitting. Many years ago, 1980 and before, this was the mainstay of John Deere's fitting. It was a quick coupler fitting. It worked real well, but today's higher pressures and greater demand for keeping leak free, we've gone to a little bit different. Other companies in the day were using what's called Pioneer or ISO. Typically, everything today went to this up till a couple years ago. We're starting to see more in another fitting. This is a sleeve and poppet. Couples together. Works pretty well. We use them in our lab at school. You recognize those. All right. Second, another usage today, we're going to just a straight poppet coupler. Now, poppet couplers are improved on the old sleeve and ball and the sleeve and poppet and the ball bearing type poppet, where you actually have a little poppet in each of the two halves of the fitting. And since you got a real tight, straight, no taper, there's little chance of leak. Push it together, it holds up real well. We're seeing these for higher pressures, and it does create a need for more parts. So the parts guy gets to sell more parts to you. So that's nothing wrong with that, I guess, unless you're the farmer. Okay, and let's see. Okay, with that we'll go to a little more couplers on the hoses themselves. We talked about different types of fittings. We can steels and compression fittings. Well, now we're going to go to the actual hose fittings that we use in the hose. I use a variety of different fittings. I have a whole selection of different types today. I'm going to demonstrate with a pipe fitting. It's just a 1/2-inch male pipe fitting here. We're going to use this hose here. I'm going to put a couple different fittings on it. I have that. That's a permanent fitting. You put that on. I also have a reusable fitting. I'm going to demonstrate how to put that on there too. So that gives us some. This particular reusable fitting is simple to use in the fact that you don't need a lot of specialty tools. A good vise to hold your hose in place. This is the sleeve. It's going to go on first. It's reversed threaded into the hose. It's got like a threaded grip to it, and you just rotate this in reverse. So it's backwards thread. And after that's on, you thread this in. And there you have it. A good fitting can be reused, but quite expensive compared to a standard, a permanent fitting. Now we'll go and put a permanent fitting on the other end of it. All right, now I've set it up things a little bit for my hose press. First, you start off by pushing the fitting all the way in. And there you have it. A permanent fitting, crimped to a hose, and now you're ready to bolt back on and make the machine work. So that covers the chapter on hydraulic hoses and fittings.